It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. One of the most influential television series of all time is undoubtedly The Twilight Zone. During its run in the golden age of TV, as more and more households were starting to gather around the warm glow of the TV set's tube, Rod Serling's breakout series chilled, titillated, and provided a great deal of thought and discussion among its viewers and fans. Unlike a majority of the shows that were on at the same time as The Twilight Zone, a large number of stories and situations presented in the series episodes are still fairly timeless and relevant today. And I wanted to make sure I started this episode with that brief appreciation of The Twilight Zone, because this week's movie is very obviously inspired by it and another aspect of those earlier days of television. This week, I'm looking at Andrew Patterson's The Vast of Night. Very obviously, The Vast of Night was heavily inspired by the strange and peculiar science fiction tales of Serling's Twilight Zone, as well as other shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, or possibly even things like Thriller, or even the Outer Limits. So just to name a few of the shows that were kind of going on at the same time, obviously very inspired by Serling's breakout hit. And it will be evident with how this movie begins, as well as some of the tension built around the primary backstory of the plot and the somewhat surprising ending. However, I also will say that this movie is taking notes from the Playhouse style of television shows of the 50s. These were also anthologies like Twilight Zone. However, they were typically longer in format, with something like a 50-minute live television performance. These would be shot similarly to early soap operas, and often, because they were live, were done with single takes and long television camera shots. So yeah, it was like having a play beamed to your television sets. These were performances of both adapted and original stories. Rod Serling actually got his start writing several of these productions, and it was where he tried to sell some of the earliest ideas that would later become Twilight Zone episodes. But it's obvious that filmmaker Andrew Patterson was inspired by this type of television. The Vast of Night was Patterson's first film, and he got bit with the film bug while in high school when he worked as a projectionist. He then started producing commercials in Oklahoma City, where he would eventually also work for the NBA team, the Oklahoma City Thunder. With the Thunder, he produced short promos for the team, and when he financed The Vast of Night himself, he pretty much struck gold. At the 2019 Sundance Film Festival, the film won the Best Narrative Feature Audience Award, and later he sold the film to Amazon, where it would have, at first, a very brief drive-in cinema run in the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, before hitting Amazon Prime a couple of weeks later. Now, as this movie begins, we see an old 50s style living room with an era-appropriate TV set, as we hear a narrator who sounds very much like Rod Serling introduce us to another episode of Paradox Theater, and this very specific episode, The Vast of Night. And as we enter the episode itself, we meet 1950s Cayuga, New Mexico, and the local disc jockey, Everett. And he's bringing broadcast equipment to the high school gym for that night's game. And it's obviously, this is going to be the big event for the night. It's often mentioned how many people in town, something like 98% of the town, it seems like, is going to be attending this game. And it's still going to be broadcast on radio for those people who can't quite make it out. But Everett is somewhat popular, as he seems to be the guy who fixes a lot of issues for folks, especially when it comes to technology for audio recording and broadcast. There is one specific member of the town that is quite keen to get information from Everett, and this is Faye. She's a high schooler who has a brand new tape recorder who wants to know how to use it. And during the game, Everett will be working at the radio station and Faye will be covering the switchboard as the local operator so that the normal operator can attend the basketball game. Now, once they both arrive at work after walking all the way across town to both of their workplaces, Faye is the first to be given a clue that maybe something might not be normal tonight. She receives a call that sounds like it is interrupted or cut off, so she can't transfer it properly. When she turns on Everett's radio show, it gets a distortion too and kind of cuts out for a little bit. The next call is just a weird signal that comes through, almost like a pulsating sound. She then tries to figure out from another operator if they recognize the signal, and she next gets a call from someone saying that there's something hovering over her house like a tornado. Strange calls and occurrences continue. Faye has more disconnected calls and learns about a police call from a trucker reporting something strange, but she's not able to get any more details about that. But Faye decides to call Everett during a song break and plays the sound to him and discovers, after kind of talking about how his radio show got interrupted and everything, that the same signal was indeed the one that interrupted his show, or at least the same sound. She sends him the sound and he plays it for the radio audience to see if anyone out there has any information or insight about what that origin of that sound is. And I think partly he's also trying to be, in some ways he's trying to break the story of this sound, but it also seems like maybe he's trying to kind of cover his own ass by playing the sound. And if it is something that is dangerous or might be military related or an enemy of some sort, that at least he's trying to get the word out there so that the military can then pick up. But I digress. So then, when eventually a man named Billy calls in and explains some work he did many, many years ago for the military, he was given a job that was completely secretive and was told that he can't tell anyone anything about what they did as it would endanger America. He helped build a bunker that housed some sort of flying contraption that looked totally unlike any plane he had ever seen before. And he was rather unnerved by the entire secretive nature of this job that he did. This aircraft he saw in the bunker flew off, and when it did, it had the same signal that he heard Everett play on air. Later on, as he kind of continues telling his story, he was later diagnosed with some sort of lung condition that he believed was caused by what he did in that desert facility. In fact, he believes most everybody was infected with something. But later, he also learned that there were several bunkers built like that one that he had built and worked at, kind of scattered all across the country. And after talking to a radar operator, Billy discovered that these signals were transmitting to something miles and miles and miles higher than anything else should be able to basically receive it. And this was years before Sputnik. So it's not like it's trying to communicate with a satellite or track a satellite or something like that. The caller disconnects, or the call disconnects, but he ends up coming back. And Billy explains to Everett that he can't give his number. And Everett does mention that, he doesn't want to put him on the air because he's not entirely sure if what they're doing is ethical, because he's not really sure if what he's hearing from Billy is true. He's willing to listen to him. He's willing to hear this tale because he's kind of engrossed in it, but he's really only going off of somebody's word. But Billy says that's okay. He understands. He just wants somebody to hear his story because, you see, he's black, which is important to know because everyone who worked on these bunkers were either black or Mexican. And years later, as these kind of people would disperse and because they were black and Mexican, the other important thing there is that if they tried to tell somebody what they had heard, it was easily discounted because of the era and segregation and the racism that was common of that time. But years later, someone he knew who never stopped working on these on these bunkers and these different kind of military details made recordings because he thought the sounds were something communicating with something otherworldly. It's like it talks and disappears and talks and disappears. And the recording that he received scared the hell out of Billy because it was exactly the same sound that the signal that was played earlier was. So he is terrified at this point because all of this old stuff is kind of coming back into his life. Now, one of the copies of the recording was sent to someone in Cayuga. However, that person has since passed away. Something that Billy suspected being the case. But Faye knows that the library has the recording because all of the recordings that this guy had was sent to the library for preservation, basically. And she knows how to get into the library after hours. So she rushes to the library to get the recording so that she can bring it back to the radio station. They can start playing it and try to confirm if it's the same thing that they heard earlier. Now, when they attempt to listen to the recording at the radio station and broadcast it over the airwaves, the station and sections of town lose power completely. And when power returns and Faye returns to the switchboard, several calls have come in reporting something in the sky. And when they go to see what's in the sky and record it for news on on something that Everett can then later play back on the radio, a couple drives in from out of town where they say they've been chasing whatever it is in the sky for miles now. However, a woman named Mabel Blanche calls saying that she can tell Everett so much more about what Billy called and explained. And it's a little bit more of like a companion story. And the reason why she believes what Billy was saying when she heard that on the radio, or heard the portion of the call from Billy on the radio. Now, Faye and Everett rush over to Mabel's to get more information. And she says that the sounds come from, in so many words, alien ships. They use the message to essentially abduct humans. Basically, they look for out of the way and sparsely populated towns. She says that they will especially be interested in people who are isolated. She thinks these aliens have been messing with people for a very long time and injecting negative things into individuals, from drinking too much, all the way up to whole populations to basically wage war against one another. She thinks that that basically these aliens just are kind of experimenting with us in so many different ways. But she believes Billy because she says her son was abducted by these otherworldly creatures. Now, before she says that, she does tell a little bit more of a story that kind of ties into this kind of companion piece to Billy's story. When she was young, there was first of all, there was a train that kind of rolled into town under its own power and eventually stopped, that was completely and totally empty. They mostly chalked it up at that time, because it would have been like the early 1900s, they chalked it up to an Indian attack. However, what ended up happening was a woman who was basically bruised and dehydrated wandered into town. And one of the few things that was said about her was that she jumped off of the train. And as she was staying at her friend's house, because she would stay at her friend's house quite often because her parents died when she was young, she one night heard this woman muttering a series of words in a language she had never heard before. And the next day, the woman crawled out of the window and escaped on a stolen horse. It became a local legend, and they never saw this girl again. Later, she met a man who she kind of fell in love with. Basically, he was in town to put up telephone lines. She conceived her son, Hollis, with this guy, who one day left town saying that he would come back, and he never did. When Hollis was a baby, he was making sounds that were the exact same as the woman she witnessed making the strange unknown words when she was a kid. And he did this for years, especially when he was asleep. These words were the same ones that Mabel herself were speaking when Faye and Everett arrived, which really bothered them at first. And then she kind of explained that it was because she wrote down these words. She would listen to Hollis say the words, she would write it down, she would repeat the words back to him. He would act strangely whenever she did. There would be other times in which she would try and it wouldn't do anything. But Hollis vanished at the age of 9, and Mabel found footprints of Hollis up to about 150 feet, and then they just stopped. There was no more footprints after that. So she believes that he was taken up by something in the sky. No one believed her story and thought that she basically killed him, but had no proof to do anything but suspect her of doing so. As Everett and Faye planned to leave, Mabel requests that they take her with them because she thinks the ship that will take everyone in town will have Hollis on it, and she wants to be reunited with her son now that she's an old woman. But Everett kind of coldly rejects the request because he doesn't really believe her story. He doesn't, I mean, she even says, well, if you're not going to take me, take these words that I've transcribed so that you can have them. And he rejects that. He just leaves, which indicates that Everett is struggling with everything he's hearing because he doesn't really believe in aliens, but he's now heard 2 stories of something otherworldly and something he can't explain. And it's starting to kind of eat away at him. And his defense to that is to be cold to it. But Faye goes and decides to collect her baby sister and pick up her friend's father's camera because she thinks something big is about to happen. And she wants to make sure that her sister is safe, and she wants to make sure that she has something to document this with. But when she gets her baby sister, the babysitter, her cousin, is missing. She doesn't know where she is, so she just leaves with the baby. And Faye eventually does connect with her cousin, and her cousin says that when she came over to get the baby, her and her boyfriend were on the roof because they saw something in the sky. There was something that was hiding in the clouds. Now, the people from outside of town chasing this thing around ultimately pick up Everett and Faye, and they're all going to chase this thing that's in the sky. However, after Everett hears what Faye tells him her cousin saw, it finally kind of registers that, yes, he starts to believe everything he's heard on this night. When he plays the alien language that Mabel was reciting when he and Faye arrived at her place, it hypnotizes the 2 out-of-towners, nearly causing them to run right into a truck on the road and be killed, basically. Everett, Faye, and Faye's baby sister get out of the car and go into a clearing into the woods where they find these scorch markings, indicating that something had crashed or landed there. And in the clearing, Faye and Everett realized something was indeed there, as the tree line was perfectly cut in the shape of something round, which is the thing that she says her cousin said was hiding in the clouds, something round. They soon see an alien craft hovering near them before another flies overhead. Winds start to pick up, and Everett and Faye embrace. After the basketball game, the entire town leave the auditorium and get into their cars to go home. A car that Everett had been using earlier in the night is found left running with the door open, but nobody around. And when we go back to that clearing where we last saw Everett and Faye, Faye, and her baby sister are nowhere to be found, and all that's left of where they were are their footprints in the dirt, and the recorder that Everett used to record that night's strange occurrences left on the ground. So let's talk about 3 things that I like about the Vast of Night. We start with how authentic this movie feels. It's hard to explain exactly how I feel when I watch this movie, because it really does have this kind of authentic feeling to it where it feels real. There's something that everybody has business to do on screen. And throughout the early part of the movie, we are given this frantic kind of pre-game activity where there's a lot of dialogue that very little of it ultimately has anything to do with the plot itself, but it is a ton of information that makes you feel like you are part of this town too. If nothing else, you are observing how this town operates and how these people all know each other. I mean, you do learn a few things here and there dropped into a lot of other conversations that slip in and out kind of supernaturally. And when I mean supernaturally, I mean supernaturally, not like supernaturally. But anyway, I guess it kind of is a double play considering everything that happens in this movie. But I just love observing this town and their relationships. And I especially love Faye and Everett. You know so much about them in these early scenes that just feels naturally kind of exudes from them. It's not something that feels like clunky exposition dialogue. You know everything about them just naturally from how they interact with one another. Faye is excitable and really into technology and science. She reads science magazines. That's her thing. And she's also, really kind of meticulous too, as far as she wants to know how to use the tape recorder before she actually uses the tape recorder. Everett, on the other hand, is cool and everyone's friend. He feels like he is bigger than Cayuga and loves his hometown still, but he feels like he's destined for bigger things. In fact, when Mabel meets him, she tells Everett that she listens to him every day, and she feels like he is really something special. And she even tells him, "I hope you get far away from Cayuga." Now, that's obviously because of the story that she has to tell, but it does seem like he is destined for bigger things. These are very well-rounded characters, and you just know who these people are very quickly in the movie, and I love that. Next, there is this feel and attitude of this movie that makes it come across as a mix of those kind of classic sci-fi horror shows like The Outer Limits, or as I mentioned earlier, The Twilight Zone, but also a radio play. When the shots are static, and we'll talk more about that here in just a moment, but it really does play like a radio drama. It's just someone telling a story with the occasional retort from whoever is receiving that story. But what it does so well in these scenes is build tension. If you like slow burn chillers, this movie is really good at making all of these long scenes of dialogue of someone telling and recounting a story feel heavy with dread. There's a conviction to the stories being told, and it's told in such a serious way that it feels like the spookiest story ever told to you. It's like reading creepypasta out loud. In a way, this movie really uses sound in all sorts of ways to build this tension. It might be just the ambience of the town or this particular night, the crickets in the air, the wind that blows by, or just the general sounds of this out of the way place. It might be a peculiar sounding signal. It might be the voices of people retelling a terrible story of their past. Sound from moment one in this plot, as it pertains to Everett's job as a DJ, Faye's interest in recording, and being an operator, it's the most important element to this movie. In fact, I could maybe even argue that if you can simply listen to about 80% of this movie and not watch it at all and still get almost all of the intended effect of it. So not only are you dealing with the elements of these creepy stories about aliens and about things that are being done on the secretive, military type of way, but you're also getting this sound, the audio being so important. That's where I feel like we are really getting a mix of those old anthology horror and sci-fi shows mixed in with like a radio play. And it's great. Thirdly, whoever made the decision to do so many long shots, they should be applauded. The thing about this movie that immediately made me fall in love with it is how we literally follow Everett and Faye walk all the way across town, just having this natural conversation about lots of different topics. They switch from topics. They go back on track. They talk about something that she read in the magazine. Everett listens. Everett, almost like he's, humoring her at times. She is very obviously, you learn so much about her. You learn so much about him. All of this is done. Everett and Faye are just walking across town. There are incredibly long shots. There are several long shots of Faye working the switchboard when the strange stuff starts occurring. It's like we're just sitting there next to her in these switchboard scenes. We also get long scenes with Everett talking to Billy as he tells his story, or as Mabel tells her story to Faye and Everett. Again, like with meeting the townsfolk of Cayuga, it adds this real authentic feel to the scenes. But the best shot of them all is after Faye sends the signal for Everett to play on the radio to find out more. The shot follows Faye to the door where she lights a cigarette for a break, and then the camera zooms past her into the street and across some fields and yards, and then then it goes all the way to the basketball gym at the high school, where then it goes in through the doors, through a crowd at the doors, and then it circles back around to look at the audience, or the audience of the game on one end of the basket, or on one end of the, or on one side of the court, I should say. And then it begins to like get involved in the basketball game itself, circles back around, and then goes behind the announcer's table, and then up the stands, where then it goes out the window, where it then goes through more fields and roads and finds Everett at the radio station, where Faye then calls Everett that he's got the call from Billy. It's an amazing shot that I don't fully know or understand how it's done, especially in the gym, where it could run into people or not be as smooth as it is. I think it's probably done with a drone, but I mean, it is impressive how far and how much distance this shot takes and makes, as far as going all the way through Cayuga, this fictional town in New Mexico. But I like to think that I know what this is doing, and it's one of two things. It's either showing a town completely and totally going about their business, totally unaware of the impending doom that is coming for them, or it is an otherworldly force watching people as they are, about to basically show themselves to some of the people of this town. It's a great shot. It's a great little movie on top of that. The Vast of Night is on Amazon. Like I said, it was sold to Amazon. It's an Amazon Studios release. You can watch it on Prime. It's an hour and a half. There's just this really fun, while still dreadful, kind of feeling to this movie that is just great. And I do know that it is mildly inspired by a couple of real incidents. It talks a little bit about that on the Wikipedia page. I didn't find out too much about one of the instances, but it is kind of interesting where it's kind of also pulling these stories from these other alien sighting or abduction types of tales to kind of weave into the story too. Just a great movie. Well, that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com, but don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, and you can also subscribe on YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, I feel like I need to find some new skin to slither into, so let's find some suitable flesh. Until next week, stay spooky.